will now proceed to introduce our next panelist. He holds a PhD in physics and is a former professor in the Department of Physics, where he taught courses in electromagnetism, semiconductor physics, quantum mechanics, and optoelectronics. He works as a consultant in biomedical and environmental engineering with extensive experience in the development of medical devices and biomaterials, as well as tissue regeneration therapies. Photo, bio, electromagnetic modulation and protection. Let us welcome Dr. Andres Ozols.
Yes. Well, there is a hidden enemy that we have, which makes all the harm from what has been injected and from the environment even more effective. There is an external factor that no one has considered until now, and today the topic of nanotechnology was mentioned, as well as graphene oxide and heavy metals. And there are even nanolipid particles with a positive charge. Imagine that if you have a combination of materials in your body that are conductive, it's obvious they will respond to an electromagnetic field. We ourselves are electromagnetic beings. Our heart and our brain emit microvolt signals, thousandths of a volt. So what happens if we analyze, for example, what factors are there? This was shared with me by Dr. Garber, as a doctor in chemistry, a molecular biologist, where we are looking at the map from the Ministry of Health itself. That last slide shows the mortality from poliomyelitis in Argentina and the age at which children die. The previous map in the center shows the distribution of fourth-generation antennas, what they call 4G, which is spread throughout Argentina, and now 5G technology, which is fifth generation, is currently expanding. And you can also see maps, the first one regarding arsenic contamination. All of this is a deadly combination. We are inhaling it, we are breathing it in, we are consuming it every day, and on top of that we are immersed in a microwave oven. You don't realize it, but right now, as we are communicating, we are being exposed to electromagnetic radiation. This was developed since World War II, and the first singular event was the Spanish flu, which originated shortly after the installation of high-voltage towers. What a coincidence! Dr. Cowan explains this very well. Every time a new technology emerges, a health disaster occurs. Notice that this is a map from a photograph in the Lancet magazine, which is supposedly considered almost like the gospel of medicine, and it publishes a graph of the 4 decades leading up to 2010, where it compares in green the background radiation of the Earth at a frequency of 1 gigahertz. We have communication systems of 2.4, 54 gigahertz and 5.8, which any elementary school child knows what that means. The higher the frequency, the faster the communication speed. But what happens? In 4 decades, 40 years, up to the decade of 2010, notice that it hasn't been updated for the following 15 years. The dose of radiation we receive increased by 1 trillion times. Lisa Simpson would ask, wouldn't that be bad? 1 trillion times more than Argentina's foreign debt. That's 1 million times 1 million times 1 million, that dose we've been receiving for a while now. I don't even want to think about how high it would go if Lance published the current article. This is the network or structure of 5G technology that's spreading. It's a directed energy. And what happens after it's applied? Mortality among people increased, obviously amplifying previous damage. This is a statistic from New Zealand. Mortality increased precisely during the parallel rollout, not just with the JEBs, but also with 4th and 5th generation technology. What's more, human fertility has decreased. In the most populated areas, for example in New York, fertility dropped by 80% during the lockdown period. How strange, human fertility decreased. On the other hand, in urban areas the problem isn't as severe. So one has to ask, what are the factors causing this damage? There are 2 main ones. One is oxidative stress. What causes it is precisely electromagnetic radiation. The interaction with molecules in the body generates ionization in such a way that the loss of electrons occurs. And what happens with the loss of electrons? Molecules with a positive charge appear, whether they are inorganic or organic molecules. And these act like a torrent that intoxicates the whole body at a level above normal. If we are wearing shoes as we do nowadays, we have no contact with the earth and we don't receive the flow of electrons to compensate for the missing electron, which makes the molecule neutral. Those free radicals are extremely dangerous. The other factor is what causes the breaking of DNA. Listen carefully, you don't need ionizing radiation, the kind that comes from the nuclear field like I experienced in the 1980s, but rather small attacks on the mitochondrial system. Once the mitochondrion, which is a small organelle, there are about 1,500 of them, for example, in neurological cells, gets damaged, it causes harm to the chromosome inside the cell nucleus. And once these free radicals keep striking the DNA repeatedly, they eventually break it. Just 3 years ago, I didn't believe it myself, and I have to admit my ignorance about that. And this is an effect that has been published in many official academic publications. There are entire books on this, and it has been known since the 1910s that the secondary mechanism of aggression by free radicals produces genotoxic effects and ultimately leads to cancer. The number of cancers that is increasing worldwide is frightening, particularly brain cancers. And on the same side where we use our cell phone, what a coincidence, right? What's happening? What is going on with these radio frequency signals? They increase the frequency of the carrier signal, which are the well-known 2.45 gigahertz, 5.8, and now we're going up to 6, up to 70 gigahertz, which is what Elon Musk is aiming for. In other words, he wants to slowly cook our brains on low heat. But what is the damage that is caused? This is a book published with some references. It has 127 pages of geographical references from a bioengineering researcher about the damage caused by pulsed radiation. What do pulsed radiations cause? These are the ones contained within the radiations. They are low frequencies, as you can see here, a real signal captured on an oscilloscope from a Wi-Fi signal that you are currently using with your cell phone. A pulse is emitted every 10th of a second. That pulse reaches the cell membrane wall and opens what are called voltage-gated channels. And those voltage-gated channels are somewhat like relays, which open when I apply a voltage. But these pulsed signals are so intense that, as shown on the scale, the signal intensity increases 70 times at the moment the pulse occurs compared to the background radiation. And that's what ends up opening the channel, for example, the calcium channel, allowing calcium ions to enter, flooding the entire cell and causing damage to the mitochondria. The mitochondria produce ATP, which is the molecule that generates energy within the organism. If the mitochondria die, we die as well, and of course the cell dies too. So what happens then? These pulse radiations were not observed in all the experiments conducted on animals, but by using real signals from a cell phone, I can cause significant damage. And why does the damage increase even more when I do what is shown next on the slide? On the right, you can see what looks like a series of flower petals. Those flower petals are called directed beams. It's military technology that's being used against civilians. This was admitted by the inventors of the military technology. It's not something I made up. I worked with both non-ionizing and ionizing radiation. I also worked with very high-energy lasers in photolithography for medical use in Fort Collins. If that later ended up being used for microchips, I don't know, maybe I'm to blame. So there are a series of symptoms that are occurring: mitochondrial damage, endothelial inflammation, something Dr. Enrique Ferracani emphasized to me a lot. He published an article where he links the well-known COVID with the issue of radiation. He describes it as an acute idiopathic syndrome, meaning a syndrome of unknown origin, but he lists it as another symptom. Currently, the number of studies correlating COVID symptoms, which are identical to endothelial inflammation, is increasing. The endothelium is the inner layer of blood vessels, and when it narrows, imagine a capillary going to the lungs, it causes acute respiratory syndrome. What a coincidence, right? Because the blood vessel closed up, and also if I put more strain on the area, I end up rupturing the endothelium, which causes bleeding, and once the bleeding occurs, the healing process begins, which is fibrosis. And the fibrosis blocks the capillaries that go to the lungs, which leads to low oxygen saturation. And there's also another thing, another situation, which is that the red blood cells clump together due to the rouleau effect, which means the red blood cells stick to each other. With just 10 to 15 minutes of exposure to the radiation from a cell phone, a healthy person can experience a case of blood vessel obstruction. And this has been observed and filmed, and it was published last year. So what happens? Cancer cases are increasing. This is a study that was done using 2 sets of statistics from different years in Sweden, where the correlation is shown using the Bradford Hill criteria, which is always The doctor observes me and then establishes the correlation between the increase in gliomas, brain cancers, which rises in relation to the number of years of cell phone use. So using pathological data from diagnosed people, they conducted a survey. How many hours are you using your cell phone? Since when? Under what conditions? It turns out that the probability of developing a brain glioma after 20 years of cell phone use is 100%. Do you understand how serious this problem is? Of times. And there's a comparative chart. This is not fiction, it's a sad reality. They're killing us with the reaction. This is a comparative chart made with an ultrasound specialist where a healthy person in the popliteal vein of the knee, after exposing the patient to 10 minutes of cell phone exposure, begins to develop blood clots. In other words, you can make the diagnosis live without needing to take a blood sample as Marcella Witt had suggested. You can take a blood sample, put a cell phone next to it, inside a Faraday cage for isolation, and you'll see that the blood starts to clot. What's more, we saw this in Cordoba. Even I was surprised myself. Who has their cell phone on? And several people admitted they had it on when we wanted to observe another effect. Indeed, red blood cells are electrical conductors. Hemoglobin has iron at its core, which is a conductor.
Dr. Ozols, please excuse me, you have 1 minute left.
All right. The 1996 regulations from ENACOM, which is the Radiation Regulation Center, allow 1 milliwatt of power per square centimeter of our skin. Do you know how much we're exposed to when we travel on a bus? Never before. And then people are surprised when someone has a heart attack or when the damage caused by vaccines is intensified. There are videos recorded of people who are struck down while using a cell phone. It's been recorded. It's not just something out of a horror or science fiction movie. So they're violating, meaning the ENACOM regulations haven't been updated because they don't want to listen to Dr. Valcarce from the state or Dr. Doucet submitting reports, and it turns out that the people at ENACOM completely ignore basic biology. They don't want to listen because I could be an excellent salesperson for the entire telecommunication system since I know the technology and I develop it, but I also need to know about biology when I start giving my opinion. I have to start studying, and that's why I'm in the biomedical field. This led to me being called nicknames like anti-vaxxer, and they even added flat earther to make it more emphatic. I'm forbidden from giving this talk at the Faculty of Engineering. Dr.
Ozols, we must thank you for your time and for your presentation.